Hey community, Carrie Lattiser, the community pastor at our Naperville location. I'm here for Behind the Message with Tammy Melchine, our teaching pastor on COTV this week. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yes, we just wrapped up filming week 2 of this series, Do the Work. And I just want to invite you, if you missed week 1 or you missed week 2, go back and check them out. I think this is one of the most necessary series for us to be doing right now in this moment. I just talked to so many people who are wrestling with relational things. But Tammy, in this message, you shared a story with us about returning your rental car to the wrong airport, and then you totally left us hanging. What happened? How did you get home? Did you get home?
I wanted people to come to Behind the Message.
Oh, perfect. Brilliant.
Actually, it was the people at the airport were wonderful, because when I realized that, I went into the terminal, and the lady behind the counter at the rental car facility, she's right away, she grabbed a guy that she knew that drove a taxi, and she called him over to get for me, and she said, by the time you get to the next airport, I will have reduced the charge to what you were supposed to have paid.
Oh.
And so I had a nice little taxi drive. And see, the good thing is,
awesome.
This won't come as a surprise to you, but I'm the person that leaves so incredibly early for the airport that I had plenty of time.
Yeah, you weren't even rushing, even with all of that.
I was more laughing at myself in the back of the taxi cab on the way.
I love it.
I made it to
I
the
am
right
the
one.
person that gets through security and has to get on the plane. Usually, I don't plan it that way.
Not
but
surprising.
This is why we can make such good friends, right? Okay, you also shared in the talk about kind of this invitation to get in touch with the emotions that are happening under the surface. You said so often our hurt and disappointment in relationships is connected to other stuff happening. How would you coach somebody who's like, oh, that's interesting, and maybe that's me, to begin to get in touch with the emotions below the surface?
Sure. Well, I mean, the first thing is you have to have a commitment to that type of vulnerability. And I think that's hard for a lot of people, but that really takes us back to where we were in week 1, is when we ground our identity in being the beloved of God, and we realize we are loved, we are accepted, we are the beloved. That can give us the courage then to face maybe some of the parts ourselves that otherwise we would feel, oh, if I discover this about myself, then sometimes we're afraid of those things. Yeah. But as we talked about in week 1, his perfect love, it drives out that fear. And so when our identity is grounded there, I think we can have the courage to be vulnerable. And I would say, like, if you're someone like me, I tend to be more introverted, but I tend to be like in my head all the time. And so honestly, it's why the practice of journaling for me is so important, because if I'm trying to understand what's going on inside of myself and sit down with pen and paper, and I actually keep my journal to God. So it's like a conversation to him. So, help me see what I need to see. And I believe that the Spirit works through that for me. And like, it slows my thoughts down, having to write it out by hand makes me go slower. And I find every time, honestly, that God will reveal something to me through that practice of what's going on in me.
Yeah.
But, I think someone that's more extroverted, I think sometimes, or if you're a verbal processor, sitting down with a trusted friend or spiritual advisor, or sometimes I think that's why counseling is so helpful.
Absolutely.
Because it helps you get things out, and just having someone, probe, and not like, again, if you've ever been to counseling, I know we both have, they're not going to tell you what is in you, they're going to help you discover what is going on inside of you. And so I think that can be really helpful too.
Totally. I learned from counseling early on, actually, a practice of trying to check in with your emotions, because I think we might know when we have big feelings, right? Like rise up, but we don't necessarily know what they are. Yeah. And it's this check-in question. I mean, it's so basic, and I try to use it in my parenting now. Like, it's kind of 6 points on the emotion wheel: sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. And so it's like that basic to be able to check in and say, what am I actually feeling? Yeah. It's just where you start, right? And then you learn to feel how that feels in your body. And eventually maybe, why do I feel this way? Or, but it's just that awareness, like you're saying, is so important.
And I think a lot of times too, in relationships, usually the thing we're feeling is the anger or the frustrated. But again, to realize that is usually a secondary emotion. Yeah. And so I think this work of talking it through or writing it out helps us get below, okay, what is lying behind my anger? Because as we talked about in the talk, it's usually things like hurt, disappointment, fear,
Totally.
loneliness.
Yeah, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's so good. I loved this breath prayer as well. So, God, help me see you. God, help me see me. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Because to your point, that is an invitation for us when we are rooted in God's love. And like, he knows already, right? We're not surprising him.
Yeah.
We're asking him to help us see
he's
ourselves
not up there
more
going,
clearly.
oh my goodness.
Which is quite a relief to think.
Yes.
And there's nothing we could do to like lose his
Yes.
love. That just creates such a freedom and a place to then go exploring and looking in the mirror. When you talked about some of these pieces we have here, we have some props here on behind the message.
And our pearls.
Yes. Anything like new or interesting to you as you were studying those specific stories? I love how subversive they are.
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm always fascinated when I study the Sermon on the Mount, just how brilliant Jesus is, you know, and, but honestly, that pearls and the pigs and, you know, that one was so confusing for so long. And that's where I felt like the Dallas Willard's understanding of that passage that I shared is just illuminating, because my guess is most of us had a little bit of an aha moment in that, because we do that so often. And I think we do that, actually, we offer pearls when somebody is not in a position to digest them. I think we do that most often with the people that we're closest to.
Sure.
You know, we usually have enough of a social sense that if it's like an acquaintance that we don't want, you should have.
Yeah.
You know, but with the people we're closest to, and if we're willing to get honest about that, I think it's so easy to deceive ourselves about how harmful that can be to relationships, because a lot of times we're right in what we're saying.
Yes.
And we think if we're right, then
they should want to hear it.
The other person should, you know, if they don't want to hear it, then they're wrong.
Yes.
Well, no.
Yes, absolutely. I have found in our friendship, when we are, carrying something heavy or wanting to, there is sometimes a question of like, do you have capacity to hear this from me? Or how can I support you in this? What do you want from me?
Yeah.
And I have found that to be helpful, so I don't get hurt when I want to give something to somebody and they're not in a position to receive it. Well, then just don't extend yourself there. You know, asking those questions.
You know,
helps.
saying that made me think of also, we were once working with a consultant who talked about sometimes when you have to have those hard conversations where you are going to need to say something like that. He was talking about a work environment, but I think this could work anywhere.
Sure.
He said, like, where he worked, they came up with a name for it. It was something like I need to have a blue flag conversation.
Yeah.
And what he said is you approach everybody knows what that means.
Oh, yeah.
But you approach the other person and say, hey, I need to have a blue flag conversation when you're in a space where you can have that conversation. So can you just think about that and let me know?
Sure.
Because then you don't,
just spring it on somebody.
Yeah, you don't spring it, and then when they are in a place where they can enter in and hear what you want to say, then they get to take the initiative in that. Yeah. And so, saying that made me think about that.
For anybody joining us, like this, none of us have this work figured out also. I don't know if you're hearing that, but we're all in process of trying to do this better and care for ourselves and care for one another better. So I love that tip. Maybe then that leads to my last question here. Just at the end, you talked about how sometimes humility can unlock kind of reciprocity and relational reconciliation. What would you say to somebody? Maybe they heard that message. Maybe they're even sensing they need to have the courage or humility to take ownership over some things. Would you give them coaching on like a first step, or maybe it's an encouragement? What would you say to somebody who is wrestling with needing to do that?
Yeah, well, again, she prefaced this with, I'm still in process with this.
Yeah.
I actually, the story that I shared in the message was a real story with one of my closest friends. Yeah. And I wanted to say it the way I wanted to say it, and that's why I wrote it down. But taking the initiative of writing it down and then getting together with her and just like reading it to her was super helpful, I think for both of us, because it just kind of then diffused the tension that was there. Yeah. But I would say this too. I think the one thing, and again, as we move along in this series, you'll see that each of these things are building on them. Sneak peek, we're going to talk about forgiveness next week. So I think if you're aware of the part you did wrong, but you're still holding a grudge or that, it's maybe not the time yet to go. We still need to do the work of forgiveness. But I think one of the cautions I would give is I think that we need to own what we did wrong, even so that, we can ask forgiveness from God, we can ask forgiveness from that other person. Sure. But I think sometimes a trap we fall into is that if we own our thing,
they need to own their thing.
yes, they need to own their thing. Or we'll say, hey, I apologize, and you didn't apologize to me. And then we just, if that's kind of like, because it could be that we could say, hey, I was wrong. And they could say, you know what, you're right, you were. And if we haven't done the work that we're going to come up on here of forgiveness, we might not be able to handle that yet.
Yes.
And so...
because our right thing to do is the right thing to do, irrespective of their response. Oh,
yes.
That's so good. Okay. Yeah. There's another cliffhanger. You're really good at leaving cliffhangers for us. Next week, as we conclude the series, do the work. It'll be week 3. Make sure you make plans to join us for that. You could find out information about what's happening at Community, maybe even a small group or a book study, or ways you can continue to engage good relational work at communitychristian.info. Thanks for joining us for Behind the Message, and we'll see you soon. Were there questions that you guys had at all?
They weren't paying attention.
Okay.
Who, us? I don't have any questions. That's not our job.
Okay. Yeah. You just make it look good. That's not our job. Yeah.